and can do well probably in the top 10 Korean American markets in the US. But beyond that, they can't.
So if that's not success, I don't know what is.
Sure. The people that love them, and nobody else is paying any attention.
And I have a really big problem with terms like that because I think those terms are very dehumanizing that I would like to see change a little bit in the discourse of how we talk about K-pop.
일간 소울 영화입니다.
Look, I think that what we have to sort of talk about is the idea of, is K-pop a thing? It's absolutely a thing. Is K-pop the thing? Nowhere close.
You've seen BTS on Jimmy Fallon. They took over Grand Central Station. They were on Carpool Karaoke. They were on Ellen, Today's Show. There's all kinds of mainstream audiences that are being exposed to these K-pop groups in a way that, is unprecedented.
Oh, they're on Ellen? I didn't know. That means, wait a minute, I got this all wrong. We got to start. I'm kidding. The U.S. market is fickle by ignorance. People like what they like. There's a reason why every country song since the beginning of time is about my dog, my mama, my truck, and church, because it works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the American motto. I think Americans don't necessarily take the time to learn the difference between Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Japanese. Asian is Asian, white is white. And when people are grouped together in a large scale way, everything feels foreign to them.
Think about how many Asian American actors are popular, how many Asian American musical acts we have. It's not that they don't exist, but they haven't entered into the mainstream of the United States either. So to ask K-pop to do the thing that even Asian American celebrities and artists and musicians haven't been able to do speaks to something else that's happening in American culture.
You have to think about culturally how K-pop is engineered. K-pop is a creation, okay? They are characters. They are taught to behave a certain way, which embraces the theme of that particular group.
I think we have to be really careful about how we talk about these stars. There is a tendency in the Western media to say things like they're coming off of an assembly line, the K-pop factory. And I have a really big problem with terms like that because I think those terms are very dehumanizing. That I would like to see change a little bit in the discourse of how we talk about K-pop.
What I would say to that is they are meant to be looked at not like you and me. They are meant to be elevated.
No, I agree. It's completely constructed. And the superficiality of K-pop is joyful, I think.
In terms of an export-oriented culture, there are extreme limitations as to what they can actually export because the country's half the size of Florida. It will have to be either manufactured goods in Korea, of which there are few, or it's going to have to be culture.
We might want to mention the importing of the culture. So because of the American military presence in South Korea, they brought American culture with them. This was during the Korean War and in the years afterwards. Then it's mixed and exported out to the globe in terms of K-pop. It's taking things from this culture and that style of music and this style of music. And I think that that's something that's unique to K-pop. It doesn't sound like other popular musics in East Asia.
K-pop is definitely structured differently. There's a lot of highs and lows, louds and softs. It doesn't follow a traditional verse, chorus, bridge, chorus formula. A lot of times it weaves in and out between a rap verse and a melodic verse. That's why I think you can't chalk it up to being kind of like generic cookie cutter pop. That's why I think you can't chalk it up to being kind of like generic cookie cutter pop.
What that means is musically, it doesn't sound like other records that are on the air today. And many of the K-pop records are intentionally made muddy. So you don't hear the separation of tracks. You're not getting those opportunities to actually see what an individual can do. You're meant to experience them as a group.
I think that's correct, especially when you're dealing with the groups. It's about putting those voices together in particular kinds of ways, which is why when individuals from those groups release their own music, it's kind of a treat because then you can see the kind of range or the kind of different ways they use their voice, which is not always apparent.
We do have people coming out and saying really awful things, homophobic things, racist things. And the more exposure to, a broader audience and the more success, you're going to get some of those comments as well.
If you look at the way Black musicians, especially Black male musicians, entering the entertainment industry before the civil rights movement, they try to portray non-threatening, entertaining, happy look. I think the same thing is going on with Asian masculinity nowadays.
One of the reasons why Psy was embraced in the way that he was is that he did not present a threat. He was round, the video was funny, and so there was no challenge to the way that American culture perceives Asian men.
2 million Korean Americans or people of Korean descent, without question, BTS or large K-pop groups are going to be able to sell tickets in New York City and can do well probably in the top 10 Korean American markets in the US. But beyond that, they can't.
I know for a fact that one of the things we know about K-pop fandom is that it's incredibly diverse. In fact, in my data, I constantly see very, very few Asian American respondents and more Latino, African American, and white respondents in the United States. So that's actually a myth.
Yeah, so BTS has been number one on the Social 50 chart for Billboard for more than 2 years, and they just broke the record that was previously held by Justin Bieber. BTS, for example, has sold thus far more than 3 million copies of their latest album. So if that's not success, I don't know what is.
Sure. But there's a big gap between being a phenomenon which is actually impacting all the music around you versus having a little bit of success. What that means is that the people that love them, and nobody else is paying any attention.
So I think the American music audience is getting less xenophobic over time. We're seeing that barrier broken down, and we're seeing some really amazing artists breaking in a way that we haven't seen before.
Look, with each passing day, there's going to be new audience members. There's going to be people who discover it. There's going to be people who enjoy the art form in many different ways. And look, by design, it's meant to be expansive, and I think that opportunity exists.
I think that success in the U.S. does represent a particular kind of prestige. However, if you look at what the Korean music agencies are doing as a whole, their primary markets are still China and Japan. It's very interesting coming from an American point of view because we're used to being the center. We're used to everybody aspiring to be like us. From an economic point of view, K-pop does not need the United States. Know for a fact that it's incredibly diverse. Know for a fact that it's incredibly diverse. Know for a fact that it's incredibly diverse.
That's why I think you can't chalk it up to being kind of like generic cookie cutter pop. That's why I think you can't chalk it up to being generic cookie cutter pop. And that's why I think you can't chalk it up to being kind of like generic cookie cutter pop.
I think those terms are very dehumanizing. The American music audience is getting less xenophobic over time. The American music audience is getting less xenophobic over time.
구독과 좋아요 눌러주세요.